I have been searching for what most people say just can't be found, but you always find me out.
Welcome to Following the Fire. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the wilderness. Just like Israel followed the pillar of fire and smoke, we want to take a new look at our beliefs and just follow him.
And like Israel, we get it wrong a lot, we get lost a lot, but we're doing our best to go where God leads us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Can't compare with what you're worth.
Today I learned what the word heuristic means. And Steve and I talk about deconstruction. What does deconstruction mean? What does it not mean? And what's the process like for people, maybe like us, who are going through it? I also remember the time at the beginning of 2020 when I asked God to pour on more calamity until we got the point. Well, I do apologize for that. I hope we got the point. And I am extremely happy that you're here with us as we wander through the wilderness together.
But it only takes a whisper, and I'll give you all my heart.
How's it going, Nathan?
Hey, Steve. It's going good. I'm extremely sunburned, which is, as people may be slowly figuring out, it's just a reminder that I am a slow learner. Because I have been sunburned before, and it's always the same thing that causes it, which is exposure to the sun.
What?
And there are the same things that you can do against it that I forget at least once a year to do with this kind of consequence. So that's where I am.
Yeah, it's usually the first time in the year that you go out for the sun, it nails you.
And I've been indoors more than normal, so my skin had not seen real sun for a long time, and so the result was not good.
I was gonna say, I look at pictures of myself now versus like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I'm so much whiter.
Yeah. Even I'm not even getting the tan from the commute, the 20-minute commute drive.
Yeah, I did the 23andMe thing to check your DNA, and then like, you are the whitest person on the planet.
Super duper white.
It's like 75% British and Irish and like 25% Norwegian or whatever, and some Finnish. So
yeah,
I'm not built to be in lots of sun, that's for sure. But the cold I'm okay with.
I haven't done that, but I do think my ancestors lived somewhere shady or cloudy, because most of the time in Colorado, I have to squint when I'm outside.
Yeah.
I can't handle regular days, but when it's overcast, I can relax finally. So I think my people are from overcast places. Well, what did you want to talk about today?
So I've been thinking a lot about this whole deconstruction thing in general, and first I want to ask you a question.
All right.
Have you ever noticed that when you learn a new word, or suddenly you suddenly start hearing that word everywhere?
I have. This happens to me with cars.
That was my second question.
Yeah. So what happens to me is when I'm looking for a vehicle to purchase, I'll be doing my research and I'll find out about something like, oh, this exact model of car fits my needs. And then suddenly I see that car everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah. They didn't exist, and then suddenly everyone is driving a Honda Civic Wago van, which was a car that I did a lot of research about because it's my dream car.
Yeah, I think the first time I realized that was this concept was with the car. I think I was 15 and a half, had my driver's permit, and for some reason, I mean, it's just probably because I was a super cool kid back in the 90s. I really wanted to get a Honda Accord.
Nice. Yeah.
I mean, of all the cars out there, right? And I'm like, and I remember on this trip we took with my family, it's like every single car was a Honda Accord, every one of them, and it still happens. You know, we were looking for a Subaru Crosstrek we bought recently, and every single car was a Subaru Crosstrek, and then we're like, I'm going to get the orange one because nobody has the orange one. So we got the orange one, and that's like every intersection. Yeah. Every intersection, there's at least two Subaru orange Crosstreks.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I recently Heather, her car is about to fall apart, and I've been and it's a dangerous contraption right now that you can't see out of. It's just a horrible, horrible thing. And I've been trying to convince her that she needs another vehicle, and so we're thinking about what she needs. And there's this little Suzuki off-road vehicle, something. I don't know what it is, but it had a snorkel on it, and I was like, "Oh, it's got a snorkel." She was like, "What's a snorkel?" And so that was about 2 weeks ago, and so now I point out every time there's a snorkel. It's kind of like playing the VW Punch Bug game.
Yeah.
And snorkels are everywhere, Steve.
Yeah, that makes me think. I took a business trip to Australia a few years ago, and this is a case where, like, you see one white Toyota Hilux truck.
Oh, Hilux!
And
yeah,
you like every single car you see is a white Toyota Hilux truck, and it's like, oh wait, that's because they are. Like,
yeah,
we went to some like small little towns in the outback. On the eastern side of Australia, and literally every single car was a white Hilux truck with a snorkel, because the rainy season comes and they got to go across rivers and stuff, and it was insane. They're cool trucks though.
That's not because you're noticing it. That's survival of the fittest.
Right.
And whatever the other trucks that were being driven are buried or rusted or something, and the Hiluxes made it through.
And they said that one of the reasons that everybody drives them is that like that's the only parts that the stores carry. So
right.
if you want to fix your car ever, you buy a Hilux.
Wow, that's funny.
But anyway, the term for this is the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon.
What?
And or sometimes, if you want to be less nerdy, you call it the frequency illusion.
Okay.
It's one of these, cognitive biases that people have. And it's just this phenomenon that when something is top of mind, you notice it more. And
sure.
It's not like we were saying, it's not actually, unless it's a Hilux in Australia, it's not actually there more. It's just that you see it more because you're thinking about it. And I don't know if that's what's going on with me and the faith deconstruction stuff or not. Or maybe it's the availability heuristic.
Okay, now I don't know that one either, so you got to explain that one.
It's kind of similar. It's like the tendency to use or think that information that comes to mind quickly is the correct thing because it's more available to you. That information is more available.
Okay.
So a heuristic is just like a shortcut to something. So I'm not sure if it's that or the confirmation bias, which is sort of similar again. That's like the tendency to focus on or give greater weight to things that fit with our existing beliefs.
That seems like it's the same thing as the frequency.
Kind of is.
It's like my idea of what truth is now includes Honda Civics. Or my idea of what truth is these ideas I already have. So then it's all the brain trying, really, really wanting the world to be understandable and fit a pattern.
That's a good way to put it because we want things to fit patterns so badly. And our brains will go out of their way to make things fit for us, whether they fit or not.
Right, yeah.
And the confirmation bias is honestly something that, like, side note, that is what screws us up so much in life. Because it's comforting to hear that what you believe is the right thing. And so if I believe that the earth is flat and I'm only listening to, it's easier for me to only listen to people who agree with that. And so then I go walk away thinking everybody in the world thinks the earth is flat. But that's only because that's the only people you're hearing, because you're confirming your bias.
Right. I do that with coffee because there are about 100 coffee studies every year. And I just wait until it says coffee is good for you. Like something, right. whatever. Drinking coffee is good for you. Excellent.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Just what I wanted to hear. And it reminds me of this thing that Jesus said all the time, which was, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of these things tend to get in our way of having ears to hear, because what we want to do is just, like, we have ears to filter, and it's very hard to be open to having ears to. I know that's we're now fully in a tangent, but it's difficult.
100%. Yeah,
it's difficult to be in that position where your own mind isn't playing a trick on you, getting you ready to interpret something in the way you want. But
yeah, and I even catch myself doing that sometimes. Like, I will, if I'm not careful, I'll catch myself actively avoiding hearing something that's going to disagree with what I already believe.
Mm-hmm.
Like a news story will come on about how somebody that I think is horrible has done something good, and I'm like, change the channel real quick.
Yeah, who needs that?
I don't want to think about that person being a good person. It's easier if I just think about them being a horrible person, because then I don't have to change my mind.
Yeah.
So, and actually, that I didn't even think about that, but that fits into a lot of this deconstruction stuff very, very nicely. But back to the frequency illusion thingy. I don't know what's going on with if it's actually that there are more people who seem to be going through this struggle lately, or not. And it's one of those, it's impossible to completely disentangle yourself from all your preconceived notions, but at least maybe it's just people in the churches of Christ. But once again, that's the people I interact with a lot. So, but I don't think so. I mean, we just like the Following the Fire Twitter account. You just posted something about that article from Beth Moore,
right?
And which was fantastic, by the way. But she recently left the Southern Baptist Convention for reasons, and so there seems to be a lot of people in the Christian sphere anyway who are doing a lot of this rethinking and this deconstruction stuff. Does it seem to be more lately for you, or just me?
Definitely yes. But again, it's so hard for me to know if it's me, or if it's the world. So I've had this problem where it feels different. The world feels different. So am I different, or is the world different, or did I change and the world changed also?
Right.
And I think, I don't know the answer, but I do think that if we were talking about where is something going on in people rethinking their Christianity or rethinking their relationship to other Christians or to their home congregations, I think that there's got to be something going on in the U.S., in America.
Yeah.
And then if we ask, it's happening in America, and who is it happening to? I do think it's a minority of people. I don't think there's a wave of something in the oxygen that has caused people to re-examine their faith, but I do think that there's a small population that is all going through something at the same time.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it's something that has always been happening on some level to people all the time, because people are always coming up against new information or situations or whatever that makes them kind of rethink their faith or what they thought before. But so what I want to do is to kind of talk through kind of what deconstruction is and myths around it and what it's not, and then maybe what's going on.
Yeah.
And why people go through this and maybe what's going on right now.
Right.
So if you just Google for deconstruction, other than like videos and images of like people tearing down houses, you're going to come across this guy named Jacques Derrida. I think I pronounced that right. I know it's French. You tell me.
I don't even know what you were going for, but you got the Jacques part right.
Anyway, Jacques Derrida, whatever. So he's a philosopher, and his philosophy of deconstruction is actually, it refers to an approach to understanding relationship between text and meaning, and pulling those things apart, which is not what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's like English major, deep stuff.
Yeah,
All right.
And it's not what we're talking about. It's something philosophy, meaning of life, whatever. But that's not what this faith deconstruction stuff is about. At a high level, the term deconstruction and deconstructing faith has been used over the past several years, decade or so, to refer to. So at a high level, it refers to people just kind of, maybe you would say, questioning their faith, but it's what we've been talking about this entire podcast, is about rethinking things that you thought you knew, that you thought you were sure about,
right?
For whatever reason, whether you grew up that way or you just never really thought it through before or whatever. And when I came across this website, the deconstructionnetwork.com, and the guy on there, I think he's a researcher. His name is Phil Drysdale, and he's got a lot of really good info on deconstruction from the Christian perspective. And he talked about there are 3 markers of what he considers someone who is deconstructing. So the first one is that someone questions their faith tradition and finds it unable to answer the questions they're asking. And it's usually questioning some seriously core things about that faith tradition, whatever it happens to be. And I like the way he put it. He said, questions that if you ask them to your minister or pastor or elder, they would be concerned.
I like that. The kinds of questions that you have a feeling that you probably shouldn't ask at church.
Right. Like threatening questions.
Like, I came up with this question, but I'm not sure it's okay that I even have the question.
Right. Yeah. And like the question, like if I went up to the elders at church and said, I'm not sure that Jesus is the Son of God.
Right.
They're like, whoa. Back up. What are you doing teaching classes, right?
Right.
Things like that. So it usually starts with somebody who has, for a variety of reasons, which we'll get to later, starts questioning faith, and the answers that they're getting back aren't aligning with what they've learned in the past, or they're not satisfactory.
They don't actually answer the question.
They don't actually answer the question.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sometimes there are some hard questions. In Christianity, there are some hard questions that if you went into the Hallmark section of Christianity, the answer that you would get is just not just like, yeah, thank you for trying, but that did not answer the question.
I love that, the Hallmark section of Christianity.
Yeah. I mean, like, just be happier.
Like the easy answer, just trust God. Yeah.
Or have more faith.
Have more faith.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is that because of them asking and getting unsatisfactory answers, they now feel the need to change some of their core beliefs. Because the core beliefs that they are questioning aren't holding up under scrutiny for whatever reason.
This is where in the Disney Pixar movie, one of your marble core memories has to change. Have you ever seen that movie?
Oh, it changes color?
It changes color, yeah.
Oh.
I mean, it's a little bit sad, and then you get rid of a little core part of you, and you have to fill it with something else.
So that reaction to that core belief could be as drastic as going full atheist. Like we talked about it a couple episodes ago with talking about the scripture stuff. And you made the really good point that if you have not thought through some of this stuff before and you bring up some hard questions, it might be just enough of a pin to pop your balloon of faith.
Sure. Yeah.
And that could happen. I mean, if you are questioning some hard things and you can't get an answer, that may, in an extreme case, it's going to lead someone to possibly just leave God altogether. But maybe it's not that drastic. Maybe it's just like the random example I said before, someone maybe believing that Jesus was not also God, but everything else is kind of the same. Or maybe it's just something as innocuous as different concepts of the Holy Spirit indwelling, or different like theories of atonement or whatever. So it doesn't have to be a massive, massive change.
Yeah, that change has to happen, but it may either feel like a complete away with everything because I just can't even, it's not tenable at all, or it could be shifting, just feel as small as shifting around a little bit.
Yep.
And, continuing.
And it's not a completely linear thing either. Some people who go through this rethinking of stuff toss it all out and start from scratch and like build it up from nothing. And some people kind of pick one thing at a time and they go back and forth,
right.
That kind of thing. Part of that also is that these subsequent new beliefs are in opposition to their past involvement in that particular faith group.
That's the one. I was wondering if there's going to be one that had to do with your relationships or your community.
Yeah.
And feeling now that I have adjusted and changed my marble, it's hard for me to stay in the same relationships or in the same community.
Yeah, because now you're the only blue marble in a sea of green ones or whatever.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't fit. And so it leads people to go elsewhere sometimes. Not always. And the third marker of people going through deconstruction is that once they have these questions unanswered and then they change their mind about core beliefs, then they typically, from then on, have a reduced certainty about their beliefs in general. And a lot of people, when they hear that first, it sounds like a bad thing. Because, I mean, who wants to be uncertain about stuff? I mean, especially growing up in a church like we did, you standing on the rock, right? And I will not be shaken. Like the parable of the man building a house on a rock versus building a house on sand.
Right.
And so this is not saying that your house is now built on sand, because I think it's a good thing to be a little uncertain.
You've lost the illusion of certainty.
Right. That's a really good way to put it.
You've lost because certainty. First of all, I want to say I am a hypochondriac, so I can go on WebMD and look at symptoms. But I want to say you just described 3 things, and I think I have that. I think I have what you're describing. So
yeah.
But I think moving from absolute certainty to the next thing, it's actually a problem when you move from certainty, then change all of your beliefs, and then you're equally as certain of your new beliefs.
Yep.
Because you have learned nothing. And I was thinking about this. I actually tend to be, I would prefer to be certain. And the amount of time that your brain wants to think that it's wrong is very short. So I'll have a belief or a stance for 5 years, and then I'll have something that happens and I change the belief. And so now I have the new belief, and in my mind, the amount of time that I was wrong was 0.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like, I was correct, I was correct. I got some information and realized I should change, and now I'm still correct.
Right.
But it's hard for me. But what should happen is when I look back on last year, Nathan, and 10 years ago, Nathan, not usually, always. I'm always embarrassed about what I believed or did or thought or said. And
but at the time you were right.
But at the time, I was embarrassed about the last year, but very confident about how I was doing at that moment. And so I go from like, I'm right 99% of the time, then 1% of the time I get that information where I realize that, oops, I was wrong. And I change, and now I continue in my rightness. But it's a healthy reaction, I think, to realize, oh, I have been wrong enough that now in these things that I believe, maybe I should consider the possibility that next year I'm going to realize I was wrong. And so I turned down the volume a little bit on how hard am I going to cling to that. And then I put my radar up a little bit to listen to new information, because now I realize I think I'm right, but maybe there's going to be new information, because that's happened to me before.
Yeah, and I think you're dead on as far as the danger of being certain. I mean, it's like I said, it's comfortable, it's nice, it's where we want to go. But when we're certain, we then lock ourselves in, and you're not open to new things or understanding things differently or anything like that. It's also a problem because churches tend to be, any church really, tend to be the type of group and type of environment in which dissent and questioning is really discouraged, because it's a threat to the stability of the community. And that goes for, political parties or some companies or clubs, or, it's not just a church thing, it's kind of a human thing that once we have an agreed set of beliefs, anybody who says something different, that's a danger, and we want to push that down.
I think there are communities that have more, what's the word for more uncertainty tolerance, though. So
yeah,
I have found I have, just to go through these, have had questions that have not been answered to my satisfaction in my faith.
Yeah,
and so that causes this turmoil inside. It causes me to question the groups around me, but also my pillars, my core beliefs. I have changed those beliefs. I've changed the questions. I have definitely felt that distance in community. And one of the things I think I have felt the strongest as time has progressed is I have wanted to distance myself from groups who are adamant that they are certain and correct all the time.
Yeah.
And that happens. So that's happened to me politically, that I feel like there's a lot of room for nuance or talks across the aisle, or maybe not everything's black and white. And so but I started life as someone who did not allow for nuance, and saw the world as completely black and white. And as I have added grays, I have been, the churches I'm looking for, or the Christians that I have found communion with, or people I agree with politically, they don't tend to be the ones who agree with me necessarily. They tend to be the ones who are okay with admitting that they don't have all the answers, or they have a more casual style, or it's not black and white. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, totally. And another aspect of that is that I've always been taught that there is truth, and I totally believe that truth with a capital T is out there, and it's findable, as we've talked about many times. But if you say it that way, then some people infer that therefore there's only one way to do everything. And that if you question the way things are done, then you are henceforth going off the reservation and you are in danger of the fires of hell
Yeah.
to get to the extreme.
Yeah, I wonder if the community problem, which is people who are struggling with these questions in a community that's not answering them, or people who have now experienced the nuance of life or the gray parts of life and are in a community that is black and white. I think that you're a closeted, nuanced thinker now.
Yeah.
And so you start to experience the disconnects between what you believe and what your community believes. And so what happens when you're in the closet is nobody knows that the thing that they just said is confirming what you thought about that group or is adding to the divide.
Yeah.
And so you're sitting with those feelings, but I wonder, it's kind of both sides though. Like the side that is the group can exist if there's too much of the questioning happening.
Mm-hmm.
So it's gonna drive those people out, but also just have an environment that's maybe a little bit hostile to that kind of question. But the individual is also picking up on things that are happening and selecting out of stepping back and maybe skipping over the questions that they know are going to get them in trouble with the group.
Yeah. That's hard because I mean I've been for years I've been one of the closeted questioners, I guess, to use your analogy, of a lot of the questions that I've had or still have are questions that like would concern the elders, would concern my family.
Right.
And so I really identify with these three markers of a deconstructing person, because I've questioned some. I've had some questions, and I can't be answered, and I'm changing some of my beliefs, and in a lot of ways, the church that I grew up in is not clicking with that anymore. So now I gotta figure out, what do I do about that?
I was thinking about this because of the Bible episode. Because what you mentioned was you ran across this 10 years ago. And so it's not even that the question can't be answered, it was that the question shouldn't be asked. And you knew that, and so you kind of dealt with it on your own.
Yeah.
Instead of this faith community being a place where you dive in with that kind of thing. And I think that the reason that you didn't bring that up is the same reason why at the family reunion you don't ask what happened to Uncle Steve, with his wife or something.
Yeah.
There are these topics that somehow we've all picked up on the fact that you don't talk about them.
Right.
And so then when another thing happens to, cousin Jeff, I accidentally used names of people that I know, but I didn't mean to.
No offense.
I'm not implying anything to a Steve or a Jeff. All what do they say in books? All resemblance to characters.
Purely coincidental.
Yeah, purely coincidental. Anyways, when it happens to the next person, you don't even have to ask. You just know you don't talk about it anymore.
Yeah.
And new Christians get into trouble because they walk into a congregation and they don't know all the rules for what you're allowed to say or not say, or wear or not wear, or talk about or not talk about. But then they learn it very quickly because we, as social animals that we are very good at picking up on the invisible rules of a culture, of a group.
Yeah.
And they're strong. They're extremely strong. I have lots of stories about this because I tend to be a fish going upstream, or a black sheep type of person who tries to push a little bit against those things. And even as someone who is naturally inclined to, when I'm in a community and everyone's pointing the same direction, I just want to go the other direction just inherently.
Just because.
Yeah. So it's it can be a good thing, but it's not inherent. It's not all a good thing. But even in that, there are limits, and I've been reduced to tears because of unspoken societal pressure things that have happened to me. Like I remember once I was in chapel
in college,
which is kind of like being in church, and you stand up and sit down, and there's songs, and there are things that you do or don't do, and everyone was standing, and then somebody forgot to say, "Everybody be seated." And so a group of 2,000 people were standing up for a song. And then a speaker came, which is clearly the time when you sit down. So a trickle of people started to sit down, but they had not been asked to sit down. And then a few more people sat down, and then a few more people sat down. And I was noticing this because I like to study how people work.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of interested in, interesting. We didn't get the command to sit down. So what's happening now are people are sitting down faster and faster because suddenly the majority has taken over. And so I just kind of wanted to see what would happen. And so then there were maybe 20 people standing out of 2,000. And then there were maybe 10, and then 5, and then 1. And it was me.
Of course it was.
Because I was like,
nobody told me to sit down.
Excuse me, but nobody has told us to sit down. We have been instructed to stand. But so that's when I started tearing up because of how strong the even as what I am is called disagreeable. That's the name for that. The character trait, which is that you're agreeable, which means that you really want people you want to fit in and you want people to like you, or you're disagreeable and you do things like, well, I'm going to stand anyways. I don't care what anyone thinks. They didn't tell us to sit down. So even as the most disagreeable person out of 2,000 people, I was sweating. I was bright red. I'm bright red now because of sunburn, but I was bright red then because of social pressure. And then I sat down because I felt like a jerk because now there was somebody trying to speak and I was causing a distraction. So anyways, that's a story about how when I learned how strong social unspoken pressure can be.
Yeah.
And when you add things onto that, like multi-generational family bonds, and it's religious, you have just turned up the pressure
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think of a story. Shortly after college, I was a youth minister in Nakoma Park, Oklahoma, which is a tiny little like blip of a town east of Oklahoma City.
Okay.
And it was a small church, maybe 150 people. Maybe that's too big. Anyway, small church. And it's one of these churches that they've had the same order of worship for the past 50 years. And you put it get the cardboard numbers and you put the song numbers up on the wall.
Yeah.
Before church.
Yeah.
And I led singing there quite often. And I remember one time it was like after the 2 songs and everybody stood up for the prayer before the lesson or something. I forget exactly when it was. But I decided not to have everybody stand up quite yet. And this one old dude, everybody called him Brother Spicer. I didn't say stand up, but Brother Spicer stood up and he looked around everybody and he's like, motioned his hands up in the air. He's like, come on, come on. Everybody's like, okay. And I'm like, I guess we're standing up. It was hilarious. He's like, that this shall not pass. We are standing up because that's what we've stood up for 50 years at this time during the worship service.
Right, and he knew the pattern, so it's in his cells now. It's not a conscious thought. It's muscle memory.
Right, he may have just stood up accidentally and then realized he was the only one standing up.
Yeah, I've done things where I was helping out with a small Oklahoma church, not meaning to pick on Oklahoma. We just both happened. Yeah, we just both happened to be in Oklahoma, but. I was at Wilshire.
Okay.
And I think that I was leading a song. And I realized, so my tempo of the song was not the tempo they were used to singing the song. And so it was just an experience of, I think what I did was like, I sung the fast version of the song. And the congregation was like, "No, Brother Nathan, we're gonna drag you back down to where it's supposed to be." And it got to the natural funeral
march,
yeah, that they wanted to sing it at, and that's like it's almost like a pile of ants, like ants and bees fascinate me, and they have a mind that is outside of each individual thing, hive mind. And people are like that, especially close-knit groups like that. And so it can even be like nobody's meaning to do anything. We're just all used to this, this pattern. It's a very interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, so all that to say, deconstructing is not an easy thing to start doing. Which kind of leads me into partly what it's not. And these, I stole these again from Phil Drysdale. He had a video talking about 10 myths of deconstruction. And I'm not going to go over all of them because a lot of them are kind of repetitious. But I thought that was kind of a good way to talk about what it's not. So one of the myths is that the reason people go through this deconstruction process is they just don't want to go to church anymore. And he's like, if people just didn't want to go to church, they just wouldn't go to church.
That's right.
They don't, I mean, why would you go through this pain and this struggle and this distancing from family and friends just because you don't feel like going to church anymore? Yeah. And he's like, statistically, the facts are that many people still go to church through it all. And actually, people who go through deconstructing, like I feel like I am, and like you are too, I guess, in some ways, they tend to go to church more than other members of the church. And most people who go through this are still very, very in love with the church and the community and God, and it's not that they want to get away from it. And it's kind of and then the next myth is that they were never really involved in the church to begin with. So,
like Steve.
Yeah, right. Like they were going to fall away anyhow, right? And once again, like there have been studies on this, and studies are all showing that deconstructors are more likely to be those who are heavily involved, people who are in leadership, oftentimes even high up in the leadership of churches. And they're in general some of the most dedicated members that there are. And
it's not about better or worse. So I think some of these are trying to say, when you're in a community and you see someone doing this, these are stereotypes you're going to think about them.
Right.
But I do think there are some reasons for why would people like that also be the ones who actually are more involved. It's not because they were better. It's because it was a more central part of their identity.
Right.
So it's easier to, if your faith is not a central part of your identity, it's actually easy to keep going through the motions because that doesn't cause you any pain. So maybe the stereotype of the, the Easter Christmas Christian or someone who gets dragged along by their spouse or something, it's fine. They'll show up. They could go every Sunday or they could go once a year. It's fine. They're not feeling any internal dissonance from that.
Right.
It's so that's why specifically for someone to go through this pain, it's because it's a core part of who they are. And so that's why you might find more people who are actually very highly involved or go more. It's not about that those people are better people or anything. It's if you question something that's not central to you, you don't have to go through a process. But if there's something central to your identity, then it's already in the important part of your life, and so you have to deal with it.
Right. You can't either just keep going and ignore problems, or you can't just easily just quit.
No, exactly. Yeah.
You have to go through this pain, and that, I mean, what you said perfectly sums up like most of his myths. I mean, the myth, like, oh, people who do this deconstruction thing, they don't know enough about the Bible. They need it explained to them better. It's like, well, no, they probably know more than people who don't do this. Once again, it's not a better or worse thing. It's just a difference. People say that, well, their faith was never real. Well, it's so real that they have to, like you said, they have to address it. One myth is that they're just leaving because they were hurt by the church. And while being hurt by the church is sometimes maybe that's a good reason to leave. Just like in an abusive relationship at home.
Right.
That's maybe a good reason to get out of there. But that's not the reason people tend to start going through this process. Usually, they said actually, people stay an average of 7 years after they start realizing that they maybe should not be there anymore. Whether it's from them whether it's abuse or trauma or starting to go through this process in general. Like you mentioned, 10 years ago, I started noticing some issues with the scripture. And,
right.
So it's been 10 years and here I am still. And, one of the myth is like, well, they're just liberal. They just want to go to a liberal church. They're just making up reasons, And I could see where that comes from, because often the things that are deconstructed are like these layers of tradition and these fences we put around things. And so when those are removed, people who honor those traditions as holy, straight from God, are going to perceive you as a liberal or whatever. So, I mean, those are just some of the myths. But what it's not is it's not an excuse, is what it kind of comes down to. It's not an excuse to just get out of there or to believe what you want to believe without feeling bad about it. It's people who tend to be very, very dedicated, very involved, that this is a very important thing in their lives, like you said, their identity. And in some ways, they've been so close to it and so involved, and they've studied so much about it, that they're starting to see the chinks in the armor, and they're trying to figure out why. Because it's so important, they're like pushing and pushing and pushing for the why.
Yeah. Which
leads them to look in different areas, look in different directions, and different faith traditions, or whatever you want to call it. But in general, I think that deconstruction is a super healthy thing. I'm sure that a lot of people who think it's scary and dangerous. But I mean, in general, I think that rethinking stuff in general is a good idea. Not just with faith issues, but in all of your life, really.
And I think it's a it's a natural part of growing up, not just faith deconstruction, but I think that we think it's normal for children who are now transitioning to adults to go through a process like this.
Yeah. Where
they are, and we use terms like, when it comes to faith, we'll say making it your own faith.
Yep.
Instead of your parents' faith, now you're making it your own. But that process is this. It is an examining, and you're either building from scratch or replacing the pillar that you were borrowing from your parents.
Yeah.
With the same thing or with a slightly different thing or a completely different thing altogether. And so this probably happens in lots of different ways throughout life, but we associate it most with 20-year-olds or so.
Mm-hmm.
That's when just it's natural for you to do this for everything.
Right. It's common when kids go to college, for example.
Yeah, and it partially maybe because of distance. There's distance there physically, so your community may or may not be as strongly influencing your formation for a while, but you're also encountering those questions. I think the biggest thing is 20-year-olds now are encountering the big questions that are big questions for a reason, which is that they are difficult to answer, or maybe they don't have a clear answer, or they don't have a good answer or no answer. And so 20-year-olds do this, and we call it maturity and
growth.
But it's also that's when people are gonna that's when people are converted, or when they leave or lose their faith too.
Yeah, you're right. There are some. Anytime you start rethinking things or looking at a different place, there's the danger of that person going that other direction or leaving entirely. But there's also not doing it. There's a danger, in my opinion, an equal danger of atrophy, and just doing something it becomes meaningless because it's never become part of your heart. There's an excellent podcast episode by Brene Brown. It's her podcast, Daring to Lead. I think it's only on Spotify. I'll put a link in the show notes for it. But she interviewed this guy named Adam Grant, and he is an organizational psychologist. And if you listen to the episode, it's right at the 45-minute mark. I think he starts talking about how rethinking. He wrote this book. It's called, I got it here. I haven't read it yet. It's called Think Again: The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And he says that rethinking is a component of courage. Those are interesting phrase.
Interesting.
And how it can lead to heartbreak, needing to make amends, admitting you might have been wrong all along, and may require a lot of hard work, and it's not for the faint of heart. And they were talking about like organizational, like work psychology stuff. I'm like,
but man,
that is 100%
close to home. Yeah. That hits the Meg and Jody thing with me, where I was certain in my certitude. I was 100% certain of my beliefs as a 8-year-old. So much so that I was willing to persecute the other 8-year-olds on my block.
Yeah.
And in the rethinking, I felt the shame and guilt and realized in that case, what have I done? Which is a very Paul like thing to, Paul was certain in his beliefs, and then kind of went to being certain in his beliefs again. I don't know how uncertain Paul was, but I think I'm hearing someone say, if there's even a little risk that someone would be led astray, that someone would be lost, then is it worth diving into? And my answer is, if that was the whole world, then maybe not. If we could but the real danger is the next generation or the people next to you, because what causes the jolt is proportional to how certain you are. So if you have and there are horror movies about this, about societies that try to construct some way of doing things, and they close out the outside of the world, and they remake all of truth, and there is security in that. But then when somebody wanders outside and meets the outside world, that is a traumatic experience for them. So the danger in not questioning is in yourself. You're not going to ever apologize or admit that you're wrong or change and be corrected. But you're also making it harder for the next people and the other people in your group, because you are, you're making it harder for the people in your group. And I think there's fear associated with that. So I think
definitely
when my son who's 6 right now, as he gets closer and closer to leaving and approaching what happens in the 20s, I could be fearful of that and want to protect him from that.
Yeah.
And that is natural. I think that makes sense. Or I could introduce him to that in proportion, slowly, and show him that, and show him the things that I'm working through or that I'm not certain about.
Yeah.
I've wished that this happened at work, and I wish it happened in churches too. When someone makes a claim, I wish that we had to say how certain we are of that claim. And if people asked me that, it would be very helpful, because I will speak up in a meeting at work, or I will say something at church, and if someone said, "What's your certainty?" I'd be like, maybe 23%. Oh, because you sounded like you were 100% sure. But my certainty is actually like, no, I'm in the low 30s, maybe.
That happens to me all the time.
and I actually ask at work. People will give me an answer, and I'll say, "What's your certainty on that?" And they'll be like, and then I know, okay, good. Now I know that you are not sure about that answer you just gave me. And I think that's a healthy thing in a church to introduce a little bit of, we don't have all the answers, or people don't know, so we're not going to come down one way or another because this is one of those very uncertain things.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be honest that we don't know some things. And I've actually heard from a couple people about this podcast that one of the things that they appreciate most is the fact that we often say that we don't know. And the fact that it seems to be an uncommon thing is concerning to me. And I was thinking about when you talk about your son. I mean, my daughter is 18. She'll be 19 in like a month.
Wow. Yeah.
And which just still blows my mind. And so throughout her life, we've been trying to be very careful and purposeful about exposing her to things that she'll see in the real world, and to help her to understand what those things are going to be like. And it's hard. It's hard to know when to let things go and let her figure stuff out on her own, and when not to. But if she doesn't figure that stuff out on her own, she's going to be in a bubble. Like there are some people who are like super keep your kid in a bubble people. Like don't expose them to anything at all. And then I'm concerned about those kids because they're going to get out into the real world, and then like everything is going to hit them at once, and I'm not sure what's going to happen. It also made me think of my grandpa, whom I've mentioned before. He forever did not believe that dinosaurs existed because they're not in the Bible. And my mom told me, I think I was there, but I was too young to remember. They took a trip out to Dinosaur National Monument in Colorado, in western Colorado.
Yeah.
And they have that at the visitor center. They've got that huge. Have you been there?
No, but there's a huge wall.
Yeah, it's this huge wall. It's like hundreds of feet long. It's like about 100 feet high. Just thousands and thousands of dinosaur bones just still in the rock that they're slowly excavating.
Yeah.
And my mom said that he just walked around like with his mouth just wide open, like, what? Because
really,
here's like solid proof that dinosaurs existed. And it's like you'll hear the gears grinding in his head. Like, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't go with what I've always believed. So it can be hard, but and one of the things that this guy Adam Grant said in the podcast is people prefer the comfort of conviction over the discomfort of doubt.
I love that. I love that because the opposite of doubt is not strength.
Right.
The opposite of doubt, it maybe is comfort.
Yeah.
Or I mean, it's certainty. I know what the opposite of doubt is, but
right.
An opposite of doubt,
conviction and doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I do think there's in Christianity there can be, or in Christian communities, I think there needs to be a healthy amount of doubt, but when there's not, doubt can be seen as weakness, and certainty can be seen as strength.
Right. 100%.
But doubt is not the same as weakness, and certainty is not the same as strength. They just are not. They are not correlated at all. So
yep.
you could, I suppose, someone who has weak faith could be full of doubt, but I think that that there is a lot of room for doubters in the Jesus movement.
Absolutely, and I think that's super important. I recently, you may have sent me this article. I don't remember who sent this to me. It was talking about how the future church, in the age of the nones, like NONES, people who don't associate with any specific church.
Okay.
In the age of the nones, the doubting church may be the last hope that we have, or something like that. The church that welcomes doubt is so important.
Because, by the way, the world has not protected itself. The world is not in a bubble. The questions are out there and the problems are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like doubt minimizing only works if you want Christianity to spread biologically.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
If you want your kids you're a Christian and your kids were born into your family and you want them to be Christian, you could try to just, you could homeschool them, and you can make sure that they don't interact with movies or shows or friends or places, so that they can go through life with as little doubt as possible, and it will preserve their faith maybe. But you can't convert somebody from, an agnostic or atheist or a nun by removing their doubts, because they're there. It's too late.
Yeah,
doubts are there.
I call that evangelization by procreation.
Yeah, and
it's really common, to be honest.
And it should be, if we had listened to Paul, which I'm glad we didn't, there would be no procreation,
right?
And it would all be seeking the people who have the doubts, right?
Right.
But the more, this reminds me of, for some reason I want to say it's, there's an economist, a French, it's like Picardy, I'm looking it up. Thomas Piketty talked about lots of ideas, but one idea was about when people who have money and people who are renters basically are out of proportion, your society is going to start to go upside down. So when everybody is renting from a small percentage of landowners who have all the capital, you are creating a situation where there's going to be a lot of civil strife, because eventually it's so out of balance that the renters just have to keep renting indefinitely. They can't afford to save up, and there's never going to be a healthy proportion of people who just can live on their own and don't have to give their money to the rich people already. Anyways, when all the Christians in your church were born into a church, and there are very few people who converted, you are on the path in a couple of generations from turning something that was a faith of a religion following Christ into a culture and a society.
Yeah.
And eventually, and it doesn't take very long, your culture is going to be the main point, not Jesus.
Yeah.
And so you have to watch yourself, because you're eventually, not only are you trying to remove doubt to keep your culture going, but sometimes you accidentally remove Jesus, or some parts of your culture that just happen to be there because you're all French or you're all American Southerners.
Well, an extreme example of that would be like Amish.
Yeah, right.
I mean, and I know that Amish people, I met quite a few when I was doing a youth ministry internship in Indiana. I mean, Amish people are very, very religious, God-loving, Christ-following people, so they would not say that it's not about Jesus, but at least to the outside world, it seems so much more about the culture than about Christ. And you don't convert to that kind of a life.
And I would say that Amish, they have to work really hard if Christ is going to stay at the center of it.
Yeah.
Because there's enough that's going to keep that going. So I would say, I feel like that my limited experience, that there are Amish communities that have done a pretty good job of keeping a Christ-like attitude. But if I was Amish, I would not have that. It would be all about, how am I different from society, and why is that important to me, and what are these core beliefs that I have that are outside of that, you know?
Yep.
So it just, so the danger though is you got rid of doubt, but your culture gets mixed up with your Christianity, and in the next generation doesn't know that. They can't tell the difference between your culture and your Christianity.
And then when the culture doesn't work anymore for whatever reason, then faith is gone.
Right.
Because it's based on traditions or culture, or what you wear, what you don't wear, or what you kind of music you listen to or you don't listen to, and it's not based on Christ. And that's a scary place to be. So I want to talk about why people go through deconstruction, and why there seem to be so many right now. The reasons why, there are millions of reasons why people go through this. Generally, from what I've been able to find, it kind of breaks it down into theological questions. Maybe people come to the point where they think that hell seems inconsistent with God's character, or they see too much of the problem of pain, and they don't understand how, like the question, you hear all the time, how could a good God let bad things happen to people? Things like that. And like we said, often the questions that are not welcomed in churches sometimes. So theological questions, and sometimes life happens, and the experience that you have in life is different than what you were told was true. Like, I'm a super fundamentalist guy. Suddenly my child comes out to me as gay.
Right.
That's going to make you rethink your beliefs pretty darn quick.
Right.
Well,
or ruin a relationship.
Or, yeah, exactly.
Those are the two options you have.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's such a good analogy, because I think the current moment has more to do with community and relationship than any of the individual issues,
Yeah. Maybe your life is hit by pain and suffering, and in such a way that it's not fair, and you get mad at God, and makes you start rethinking some things, which is
right.
An entire episode that we're going to do later. Because I have been there, still there in some ways.
Yeah.
So those are general reasons why, but what's hit me the past few years, what I've seen is that it seems to have turned up a few notches. And whereas people have always gone through this on some level, it seems to be happening more. And so some of the things I've seen, I know that like recently, just this week, there's all these articles that came out about how Gallup polls show that church membership has fallen below 50% in America for the first time ever.
I saw that, yeah.
This article that I read said, but it's not that people are leaving God, they're leaving church. And so spirituality is still high. And it says, for one thing, studies don't actually show a significant decline in spirituality among Americans. People who study American religion talk a lot about the rise of the nuns. This rapidly rising American demographic, 21% as of the most recent poll, say they don't label their spiritual beliefs, but that's not the same as them not having spiritual beliefs. Most of them do. They just don't necessarily trust historical institutions like church to guide them through their spiritual journeys. So just because they're not church members doesn't mean they consider themselves secular, atheist, or agnostic.
Right.
So part of it is people are kind of pulling back from church, which kind of makes me wonder, why are people leaving church? I don't know.
Every time you say the rise of the nuns, I picture like a zombie movie with Sisters of the Cloth. So it's happened a couple of times in this episode, and I can't stop my mind.
Or for our older listeners, people like the Flying Nun TV show. Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw that.
Attack of the Nuns.
Right.
The Year of the Nuns. It's like Planet of the Apes is basically what I'm picturing,
Okay.
only with nuns. I think I wrote down 3 things that happened to me that also happened to every other American. So,
Okay.
one, I don't even want to say it because we don't have to anymore. To reveal my personal positions, I'm very happy about. That is Trump.
Yeah.
Trump is a force that happened, or maybe a symptom of something in this country that impacted us all in quite a few ways. And
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I'll just, the main one being they call it like the temperature of the discourse, the tone, or the heat of civil discourse, maybe moving from the Lincoln Douglas debates to some future point, from civil to less civil.
What it is now.
What it is now. And, I don't know if Trump is to blame for that or if we are to blame for Trump, right? So
Right.
I don't. But that happened to all of us as Americans. And unfortunately, for Christians or non-Christians, Trump wrapped himself up in an American flag and
Holding a Bible.
holding a Bible and
Yeah.
tied himself to that movement, and the movement did not reject that.
Embraced it.
And embraced that. So that is a thing that Christians and non-Christians all witnessed at the same time, and has been formative to us. What non-Christians think about who is Jesus, but also what Christians are thinking about other Christians and our communities. Who are we? What are we for?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, when 80% of evangelicals vote for Trump twice in a row. And
yeah,
that made me that hurt.
It's hard because I have learned, we just addressed this. I have learned that I am not right all the time, and so as I've gotten older, I have tried to hold my beliefs as less certain.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I encounter somebody who sees the same event and sees it completely different, my natural reaction to that is now that I want to understand it, and I can almost always learn from it, and then see that person's perspective. And I just so Trump has been a phenomenon that I have been unable to do that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And it's I can't even picture. I am somebody who I was on the debate team, which is where you are good at arguing both sides of a issue. You don't get to pick what side you're on in debate. You just
prepare for both.
There's the topic, you prepare for both, and you're good at both. And so you have to be able to see the logic or the reasons for both sides. And that's something I think about myself that I can do.
Mm-hmm.
Even things that I feel strongly about, I can see why someone would think the opposite. But the one, I guess it's not one thing, but Trump has been this thing that I want so badly to understand in a way that is a reasonable explanation. Why did 80% of the people who are sitting in a pew next to me listening to the Sermon on the Mount, why did they not see these events and react the same as me? And I can't tell if this is one of those times when I just am blind and I'm having trouble empathizing, or I'm just correct and it just turns out sometimes things are right and wrong, you know?
I'm going to go with your correct.
Yeah, I think but here's that, to go back to our questioning faiths and changing core beliefs. What I would like to do in any time there's an issue that I'm right on, and then there's another stance of people who are wrong about it, I want to dismiss them as either unintelligent or immoral. So either in the IQ quadrant or in the decency quadrant. If someone disagrees with me, I want to say, well, they must either be stupid or
evil.
They must be evil. Thank you. Stupid or evil. But I am confronted by these pesky, intelligent, and moral people who went through the same 2016 through 2020 that I did, and who I know are intelligent because I work with them or because I know who they are, and I know that they're moral, and they have seen the events differently, and I just my brain doesn't know what to do with that.
I am 100% with you on that. I mean, we could.
So yeah,
go on about that.
This isn't the Trump episode.
No, but
that's
one of the things I had down as far as why this seems to be happening so much lately. And I do think that Trump has been a catalyst for Trump and the things he brought with him, that he popularized. Like you said, symptom or not, when he took charge, he made lots of things okay. He made white supremacy okay. He made sexism okay. Lots of stuff. And
in some ways maybe just said the thing we were all thinking, the thing that we would wink, So
right.
So in that instance, for me, it's not white supremacy or whatever, but it's explicitly stating that we are having a culture war. It's the Christians versus the communists, and we're gonna beat them.
It's more us versus
or there are things that you would hear, that the country's going to hell in a handbasket.
Yeah.
I don't know, we're letting these people in the military, or the decline of the family, and things that are being whispered in pews by a small portion of people. It was brought to the center, and then you used to have to come up with a different reason for a policy that played better on TV, that was more political.
Mm-hmm.
isn't it funny that we have an adjective that is political, which means that you make it decent for people,
Yeah.
right? Being political is that you
Politically correct.
try to
Politically correct is actually otherwise known as being nice.
yeah, it's being nice, and it's I'm trying to be political, which means I consider everyone in the room and make sure that I'm not going to offend someone. Right. We need that's a word that means something else now, and that's not a Trump phenomenon. That's not new.
Well, the issue with Trump is that not that he existed, but that he tied himself to Christianity, but it's that Christianity grabbed onto that and held on tight. So people who in Christianity, and I'm not talking about outsiders because we're talking about deconstruction here. People within the Christian sphere saw that and saw the dissonance and the cognitive dissonance there, and saw the people around them, like you said, the pews next to them, supporting this kind of behavior. They're like, hold on, if this church is wholesale, apparently accepting this guy and what he stands for, which is clearly wrong, what else is wrong? So it's kind of a trigger. Like, now I'm going to start paying a little more attention. So it's kind of the dedication thing. And so these people who are super dedicated, on average, not everybody, obviously, super dedicated and involved, saw this dissonance and started like questioning everything else around them.
There's a pretty sizable population in America of people who they're not Jesus Christians anymore, but they are culture America Christians, but they stopped going to church and they haven't gone to church for 20 years.
Well, they'll check the box if it's a question asked.
Yeah, if someone says, are you a Christian? They'll say, dang, darn tootin', and everyone else should be too, and it was founded on Christianity, right? So
right.
So that portion of the cultural, they were biological Christians 3 generations ago, and then they confused their culture and their Christianity, and it just became their identity, fused with some America stuff.
Yep.
Those people went for Trump in droves. But then when you go to a congregation and the people who are there, what happened was dedicated Christians on both sides of the pew witnessed all these things together, and it was a catalyst to start looking at each other. And at least for me, it was, man, I'm seeing this play out, and it's clear to me. I don't care too much about who people support politically.
Yeah,
but I do care a lot about what is Jesus and what is following Jesus, and the cultural Christians who didn't have very much Jesus. It feels like, man, I'm nervous here because I'm trying not to paint with too broad a brush, because I honestly don't understand the devout Christians who really are trying and really want to be followers, and also they don't even see. Not only do they not see what I'm talking about when I say Trump,
yeah,
but they're screaming at the monitor because they don't understand how I could see Trump as evil, right? Or Trumpism. I don't even care about Trump. But for me, what that represented was Christianity, cultural Christianity in America, getting our relationship with power wrong.
Yep.
Getting our relationship with truth wrong, and getting our relationship with outsiders wrong.
Those are some big things to get wrong.
But they're the same things that the disciples got wrong.
Yeah.
They wanted Jesus to take over Rome.
Yeah.
They all got the power thing wrong.
Oh yeah.
And they didn't get it. They didn't get it even until after the resurrection. They were like, the insurrection failed, and now we're sitting in this room just waiting to be arrested.
Yeah.
Right. They got it wrong too, but Jesus was reminding them, no, my kingdom doesn't work that way, and my power is is when you give up power and when you serve people and you elevate people up. And so when I look at the first century Christians, or not even the first century, the first decade Christians, it makes sense to me that they got it wrong. But then they wrote it all down for us, and then we get to look at that. And so it's just hard for me to miss. We have now the benefit of the story.
Yeah.
We know that they were wrong when they said that, but we want it so bad. We want, and I'm saying we, meaning American Christians, American evangelical Christians, we want to be back in that seat of power. In schools, we want them to teach or not teach what we say.
Right.
In what's happening in the culture around us, maybe we're on top at some point, or we imagine that we were, and we want to get back in the power part of it.
Yeah.
So it's I guess it's 2,000 years old, the problem. And truth, you said earlier, truth with a capital T exists and is discoverable. And I think one thing that was solid in my life, especially in my political life, was that as a conservative Republican, with my catalyst, my introduction into politics was the Bill Clinton impeachment trial.
Mm-hmm.
What was a clear thing to me was that the moral characteristics of leaders mattered, whether it was your coach in Little League or the President of the United States.
Yep.
And I kept on believing that, and my tribe stopped believing that in slowly, but then looking at the polling, my tribe made a 180 in 2016.
Yeah, and that's, I think, the pain point is that everything was going one direction. I have the exact same path as you, basically, as far as being, like, I was super Republican, super conservative, all on the, it's kind of like, I feel like Paul talking about how he was like the Pharisee of Pharisees,
Yeah, yeah. But
I mean, that was me.
But I didn't, but it was also not what it is now. So I started conservative, and now I don't even have a name for what I am because they took the name for what I am.
Yeah.
I'm a conservative evangelical.
Right.
But
if you say that has totally different connotations.
But the Buffalo guy maybe is too, and so they took the name, and I honestly don't know what to call myself now, because I feel like I stayed being conservative, and I feel like I stayed being evangelical, but the definition changed.
Right. And when that definition changed, that I think that for a lot of, all throughout Trump's presidency, I was very concerned and disheartened by my fellow Christians' support of him, not just because, like, for their own hearts and how sad that was to me, but what it said to non-Christians about the church. And I focused on that a lot, as far as, like, how and I said this over and over, how Trump is giving Christ a black eye. And that really weighed on me. But it wasn't until recently, when I started kind of looking into some of this, how much of a black eye Trump was giving Christianity to Christians as well.
All the political stuff aside, what happened to me was that my big faith questions and my core beliefs changed when I was 20. And then maybe again when I was 30.
Yeah.
With pain or trauma, or just with being out on my own.
Yeah.
And what happened in 2020 to me wasn't that those questions were either all there or I didn't get any new questions, but I had been aware that I was sitting next to people in pews that maybe wouldn't have appreciated where I came on those things, but I had decided them 10 years ago, and I'm confident enough that I don't really care that much that the people next to me in a church don't believe that or believe something different. That's going to happen in a church, and it should happen in a church. I think what happened in America in 2020 is a lot of people who were sitting in pews and they were okay with the discomfort of, well, I believe this about the inerrancy of the Bible, or I believe this about homosexuality, or I believe this about illegal immigration, or whatever it is. They were fine with it, and then there was a catalyst in 2020 which compelled people to feel like they needed to publicly say, I'm sorry, I'm not, that's not Jesus.
Yeah, and that's not who I'm a part of.
Right. And so if there hadn't, so there was Trump, then there was Black Lives Matter.
Yep.
And then there was COVID, and
Yes.
It could have maybe been any one of them, but Trump itself was not enough for me, by the way. I would have kept on. I was disappointed. I'm extremely politically engaged. And in 2016, I was disappointed in evangelicals, but I kept going and sitting next to pews with them because that's okay.
We can have a difference of opinion.
Yeah, even if I think it's wrongheaded, because I'm sure I have that stuff too, and also politics is important to me, but it's to most Americans it's football is more important than politics to most Americans,
right?
And politics is more important than football to me, and it's okay,
Yeah.
But Black Lives Matter, I am ashamed, and this is a confession. I have witnessed race riots on the news my whole life, and I have not cared.
Yeah.
I have maybe had a stance on the issue. I've been proud enough to come up with a stance. They shouldn't do this because of this or whatever. But it wasn't until 2020 that I finally had compassion, and the confession is, it felt like I saw this problem for the first time that's been in front of me for my whole life.
I felt very similar with that because, like, my wife grew up in a part of Oklahoma City in Del City, which is much higher percentage Black, and so she, just by nature where she grew up, she knew a lot more Black people. I mean, I grew up in like the whitest town in America,
right?
Fort Collins, Colorado. Right. There's like one Black kid in my high school of 1,000 people. So like even on like the things that her friends shared on Facebook for the past 10 years, where there were lots of videos of police brutality and all kinds of other things that she would show. She'd like, can you believe that this is happening? And I would like, I can't hear it. It's too depressing. I don't want to hear it. And I feel bad. I shut it out and I tried to ignore it because it wasn't bothering me. There's something about this compounding and the multiplication of factors with the pandemic, where it's like we all had no choice but to sit at home and watch this stuff.
Yeah, I'm curious why. I do not know why I was receptive this time. Is it because
that's the only thing I can think?
It was because it was in this. It was trauma on trauma.
Yeah, we're all watching the news to see what the COVID numbers are and see what else stupid Trump said, and this comes up too. It was also a lot larger scale than it has been in the past recent years as well.
And yeah, I'm just curious that because I did not feel like I don't know why I was open to it now, but I do have a feeling that just like that there was again a large portion of white Christianity that somehow also woke up to that at the same time as I did.
Yeah,
it's just interesting to me that I'd believe that it's COVID, but that again was so my eyes were opened to my brother, to my neighbor.
Yeah.
In a way that I couldn't put the scales back on, even though I'm living with this uncomfortable thing.
It's like you've been the Levite walking by for years.
Yeah, and I would have preferred
not even seeing the guy in the ditch.
And I would have preferred to continue, because now I have to do something, But again, that was a thing where my community in the pews reacted, and by the way that I have reacted 100% of the time before that.
Yeah.
But suddenly I felt the wedge, I felt the distance in my community, and I also felt the need to speak up on behalf of my community, and so I did, and I started looking at my role, my church's role in the history of this. If it was just Trump, I would have been fine to continue.
Yeah.
But the Black Lives Matter movement suddenly gave me this reason to do something, and not just
for me to follow on what you were just saying, I probably would have been fine too if it was just the issues with Trump. But when the Black Lives Matter movement stuff came along, and I saw my church, local and nationally, do practically nothing, that hurt. And I'm like, something's not right. What's going on here?
And for me, the guilt that I live with is that it would not have hurt before. That's what I mean. So something happened, and suddenly I was woke, is the term.
Yeah.
But the person next to me that is my brother and is in the pew next to me did not go through that same thing. Didn't see Trump the same way. Didn't see the racial reconciliation moment in the same way. And so there was this distance that was growing, but I was starting to see active hurt from Christian culture. And I remember praying for this early in 2020.
Really?
So publicly, at the church that we attend, something was happening. I want to say it was, let's say, February 2020.
Okay.
I could be wrong, and it's probably recorded somewhere, so I don't know. But there was turmoil happening. I think it was from COVID-19, the rumors of it. And I got up in front of the church, and I asked for more. So I said something like, God, be with us through this moment. We are filled with sorrow for what's happening. But if what it takes for us to wake up to who you are and who we need to be is that we need more of this, then pour it on. And if what we need is not for the political discourse to be turned down, but for it to get worse so that we can finally wake up and see who we're supposed to be, then I ask that you bring that, and that you don't stop until the church is glorifying you. So that was...
Thanks a lot, Nathan.
Yeah, so then we got 2020. And
now we know whose fault it is, right?
But so I kind of think, and there's a lot of hubris here, but I think the church had a moment, and we did need this. We needed the coronavirus pandemic. Pandemic means it was everywhere,
right?
And the Americans that they never go to church, but they're still consider them Christians, have a hard time picturing that there's an anywhere else other than America. But this trauma happened to the whole planet. And so we got to see, those of us who have friends who live abroad, we got to see what happens when the relationship between cultural Christianity and power and truth and the outsider is corrupted. Yeah. And so for a sadly for a small percentage, it was a waking up moment. It was the trauma that we needed to repent, and to ask and to confess and to ask for forgiveness and to rethink what should we be doing with power, and like elections or whatever our powers that we hold, or covering up scandals, that's a power issue. What should we do with truth, and how should we treat the outsider? And maybe I should be expanding who I think of in the kingdom as not just Americans or not just my tribe. And so the pain is that those of us who woke up were surrounded by people that disappointed us so much by continuing on as if nothing happened.
It was such a huge opportunity for the church to be seen as what I think Christ intended it for it to be, which was a support for each other, a champion for the oppressed, a group that's going to help the world instead of harm it. I mean, like all the crap about masks and not believing the coronavirus is real, and how central that was in the evangelical world. It is also was another catalyst for people wanting to rethink their connection to this group called Christians.
Right. And it's happening thanks to social distancing. It's happening to little groups of people in congregations everywhere, but we've been finding each other because some of us are the only one in Tennessee.
Yeah.
Or the only one in their congregation, and it's such a lonely feeling. But a few lucky ones of us found each other so that we could not feel crazy.
Yeah, and the social distancing, I think, is an aspect. It's kind of like the last aspect that I had down here as far as a compounder of the situation. Maybe not in a bad way. Because I really think that there's a lot of good things, because speaking for myself, I probably would have still kept going along with things had I not been forced to distance myself from the congregation and actually look at things. And when I did, I saw some things that concerned me and made me sad. And it gave me a chance to look more broadly about what's going on in the rest of the world, spiritually. So it's I think that it's been a year of forced growth in a lot of ways for people, and forced self-reflection that we, especially in our quote-unquote fast-paced world, don't take the time to do very often. And we've just had a situation where, whether or not God brought it on, the church has had the opportunity in many ways to be self-reflective and to look at itself. And I think in a lot of ways, the church has failed. And I think that's one reason so many people in the church are rethinking what they've always believed. And I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, Bader-Meinhof phenomenon aside, I think that there are a lot of people who are going through this, and it's hard. It's not fun, but I feel that that's where we need to be. And I one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this for this episode was I want people to know that they're not alone, that they're not the only ones in Tennessee, like you said,
right?
That are struggling with this and are trying their hardest to follow God through the wilderness. And, maybe sometimes things need deconstructed for a reason. And that reason may be that it's broken, or it's like cut the tumor out. I don't know.
Feel free to edit any of this out, because I know we could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. But first thing I'll say, which I think's speaks to what you said, which is that the most pain for me is thinking about my brother and sister in Christ. That I have gotten to a point of what feels like irreconcilable difference.
Yeah.
And I have, in my personal journey, I have always gone towards more and more acceptance of more and more different brothers and sisters, because I want to expand what is the answer to who is in the kingdom and who's on my side and who and all of those things. And so that it's such a difficult moment right now for me to figure out, what does it look like for me how should I think about the other side of the divide, and how do I love those people, and is it redeemable?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer, but I have hope, but maybe it's not. Maybe there's a remnant that moves on. There was this prayer that I came across in the With God Daily Devotional. It's an email that Sky Jitani sends out. And so I'm giving so it's William Laud, who's from the 1500s, prayed this prayer, and he said, "Most gracious Father, we most humbly beseech you for your holy church. Fill it with all truth, and in all truth with all peace. Where it is corrupt, purge it. Where it is in error, direct it. Where anything is amiss, reform it. Where it is right, strengthen and confirm it. Where it is in need, furnish it. Where it is divided and torn apart, make up its breaches, O Holy One of Israel."
That's good. And
it spoke to me because of that moment, and I'm so glad you said, I want people out there to know they're not alone, but sometimes following Jesus is lonely.
Yeah.
For a while, but the church is out there, the followers are out there, and the nice thing is you can just look to the left and the right, and eventually you'll find someone who's going the same direction as you, because you're both following the same person.
Yeah, and not only are they not alone, but I think that this is a good thing. Yes. I want to emphasize that.
Here's another crazy thing I've prayed for before. My political beliefs are such that I like to say that Christianity is a weed. And what I mean is that Christianity does best when you're trying to stamp it out. Then it just spreads like crazy.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't do very well when you water it and you put it in a pot, and it kind of rots a little bit. So when my political beliefs in the past 10 years, I'm glad nobody ever asked me this at church, but when they would say something like, should we enact this law or prayer in school or whatever, my answer is, I think they should make Christianity illegal. I think the best thing for the kingdom would be to outlaw Christianity, because Christianity does great in that. The fire is good for Christianity, and it holds up. So that, again, somebody else needs to take over praying for a while, because clearly I need to not be asking for more 2020, but I just keep doing that because I do think we need a little bit more. But the bringing it back to Israel, this is not a new problem.
Not at all.
Israel was selected by God as the chosen people, and they were supposed to bless the rest of the world.
Yep.
But instead, they thought that the specialness was about who they were. And so most of Israel focused on their specialness, and they thought it was because of them, not because of God giving them a mission.
Mm-hmm.
And over, little portions, the Bible that we have is not the document of the majority of God's chosen people from, let's say Abraham to Jesus. It's the document that was put together by the outsiders who survived through the majority opinion being completely opposed to what God was trying to do. It was the unpopular prophets who sometimes had bad news and sometimes said, hey, I don't think we've got it right. And it's most of Israel got it wrong, and such a small percentage of Israel got the priorities correct and realized their chosenness was for them to go bless the world, not for them to win and subjugate the world or be lifted up. It was for them to lift other people up. I think we're just reliving that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we probably should wrap this up. I want to share one quote with you before we quit. It's from Sarah Bessey, her book Out of Sorts.
Okay.
Which I recommend. It's all about this process we're talking about. And she said, if our theology doesn't shift or change over our lifetimes, then I have to wonder if we're paying attention. So this whole process, it's not a once in a lifetime thing. It's not like, oh, pandemic, Trump, Black Lives Matter, let's change things and then move on with our lives. I think it's something that we need to be renewing our minds day to day and renewing our connection to God and constantly trying to ask questions. Because if you stop questioning, you stop learning, and then you stop growing. And we need to be growing toward God all the time. And I think asking questions, and hard ones, uncomfortable ones that might get you kicked out of church, at least ask the question. You know, the answer could be who knows what, but at least ask the question.
I'm thankful that I have people to go through it with. That
absolutely.
So I'm really grateful for you, Steve, and over the last year, you know, even before we were doing this thing, it's just nice to have someone else so that I don't feel crazy, you know. And
I like how you said you don't feel crazy.
Yeah,
no comment on actual craziness.
No, the jury's still out on that. But you get two crazy people together. Here's a problem with the internet. You get two crazy people together, they're both going to think they're sane. So, right?
Yeah, and they're both going to start a podcast.
They're good. Yeah. So.
Yep. All right. See you later, man.
See ya.
But you only wanted love.
Hey, thanks for listening to Following the Fire. If you'd like to see show notes for this episode, which includes links to everything we mentioned as well as all the scriptures, head on over to followingthefire.com and just click on this episode. There's also contact information on the website. Let us know what you think about the show and if you have any suggestions for future topics. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts if you could. It really helps other folks find the show. And as always, thanks to the fabulous Daniel Wheat for the theme song and the music for the episode. You can find more of his stuff on Apple Music and Spotify. See you later.
Can't compare with what you're worth.